folks, welcome back. This is episode 5 of the Experimental and Civic Arts Lab, funded by the Responsible Governance and Sustainable Citizenship Project at UNH. In this episode, I want to tell you about a current project that I'm working on with one of our talented senior communication majors, Audrey French, who is trained in ballet and has been practicing since she was 3 years old.
I always remember when I was like 3, the first, like when I say like I started dancing at 3, like what can you really do at 3 years old? But what they have you do is they will play music and it'll go from a slow tempo to a quick tempo and a slow tempo, and you have to convey the emotion that the music makes you feel.
I talked to Audrey recently about our project this semester, which is a piece dedicated to 3 women whose lives have been impacted by the January 6th insurrection and by efforts on the part of the former president to overturn the election. These 3 women are Cassidy Hutchinson, Ruby Freeman, and Shaye Moss. Cassidy Hutchinson was working as part of the former president's administration at the time that the insurrection was unfolding at the nation's capital. And subsequently, she testified before the January 6th committee. Shaye Moss and Ruby Freeman were election workers in Georgia who were targeted by Rudy Giuliani and others in Trump's orbit. They were maliciously and falsely accused of engaging in voter fraud. Their personal lives were torn apart. They were subjected to threats. Ultimately, they too testified before the January 6th committee. These women obviously come from different backgrounds and life experiences, but they are similar in that they chose to fight for their own integrity by appearing publicly and telling the truth as they know it, in the face of lies and disinformation. So at this point, Audrey and I have a general plan for an iterative process. Before you do the choreography, if you could write down what your perception is of these women and what's happening with them, but then while you're choreographing, how that's shifting and changing, and then after it's choreographed, you'd have another set of notes or journal entries that's saying, okay, I now have this perspective because I've done this choreography.
Because yeah.
I already have a composition that is written and recorded, which I've shared with Audrey. My inspiration for this composition is Wayne Shorter, who is a saxophonist who played with Miles Davis, Herbie Hancock, and any number of other important jazz musicians. I like Wayne Shorter's pieces because they usually involve a complex but still approachable theme that's built on interesting harmonies between multiple horns before breaking off into improvisation sections. So in this piece, which I've tentatively named Beautiful Star, I am sort of channeling Wayne Shorter, and I've divided it into several sections. While I'm writing that kind of piece, I like to think of the metaphor of like that I'm giving a tour of a house or a building, and like the introduction is like, I'm about to give you a tour of this house. And then each of the sections is like, look at this room.
A different room, yeah.
And then at the end you kind of come back out and you're like, What a great house that
That's
was.
the end, yeah.
In our recent conversation, Audrey and I are discussing our strategy for taking the composition as it's been written and having her create choreography that will express different dimensions of these women's lived experience. Audrey has heard the composition in its entirety, and we both, of course, have watched and listened to the testimony of Cassidy Hutchinson, Shaye Moss, and Ruby Freeman before the January 6th committee. So in our discussion, we're identifying some themes with regard to how these women comport themselves in front of a camera, their general disposition, the feelings that they describe, the concerns that they describe. And what we're doing is trying to distill the lived experience of these women so that we can translate it into movement set to music and later add some additional elements, video assets, audio clips from interviews and testimony, and layer these in a compelling way.
But I was just thinking of like the emotions that I was feeling when I was watching the videos, and I was like, oh, these are definitely the emotions that I want to channel into choreography. For Shaye Moss, I was really thinking definitely like invasion of space, invasion of privacy. Also, I think she seemed angry, but she seemed like just sad that the situation had like happened how it happened, and how a job that she loved and was very I don't know, I loved how she talked about how she could help elderly people vote and she could help like disabled people vote. She was really passionate about it, and something that she took really seriously and passionately ended up being kind of invaded for her, and she had to quit her job. So I think sadness over that, kind of grief that she caused. She was talking about how she felt bad because she was causing her mom and her grandmother to
Hmm.
have to go through this just because of her. So I think grief, it's watching her talk about her situation and how it like deeply affected her life. There's just so much anger and like hate surrounding it.
I think they picked these women because they were two African American women lacking in power who probably didn't have any way to respond, like not enough money to hire lawyers. So like we can just railroad over these people and like what are they gonna do?
And I think when she was talking about the messages and the threats she was receiving and how a lot of them were racist comments, I
Mhm.
like it immediately shows kind of the true colors because people are coming for her race. For Cassidy Hutchinson, I think she stayed very composed while she was talking about it. But I think a lot of the time, what I was hearing in her stories was that she felt kind of like helpless on the scene, like she was left out of a lot of conversation and didn't know what was going on. And she was kind of like, I'm trying to get these people to like, I'm trying to talk to them and they won't listen to me. So I think like helplessness and like being left out of like the conversation,
Mm-hmm.
some feelings I was getting from that. Yeah, I really liked how she kind of was describing the man she was working under.
Mark Meadows, I think.
Yeah, Meadows. I
Okay.
liked how she kept talking about how there's different moments in time when something really kind of like frightening was happening, and she would walk into his office and he would just be sitting on the couch on his phone and kind of ignore her. And I thought that her kind of bringing that up multiple times and just like kind of painting a picture for everyone listening of like how relaxed he was and how much he did not care.
Yeah, I mean, I watched all of that testimony, most of it live while it was happening, and
Hmm.
I remember that when because I have that image in my head of Mark Meadows sort of sitting and not responding. I think inside he was worried for himself and knew that it was like wrong what was happening, but was just checking out, like
Yeah.
detaching, like
Hmm.
detaching out of necessity, but also like, just lack of courage.
Especially I think something I could like incorporate into the choreography, or if not just like take emotion from, is when she was describing on the 6th trying to talk to him while he was in a car on a phone call, and he would just slam the door, and it happened
Mhm.
twice. And I feel like that is a literal example of being shut out. Like that's like an actual physical example of it.
That's why I thought it was interesting to juxtapose these women, because even though they're like, Cassidy Hutchinson is this relatively privileged white woman who has a really high position. She's literally in the White House, but
Yeah.
she still feels sort of not being heard and not being taken seriously in some ways that are parallel.
I think the first step I need to take is to maybe even like rewatch the videos and just write down the initial like feelings, and I think once I like kind of journal it a little bit,
Mhm.
then I should listen to the music and see what parts connect to the feelings I wrote down, and then build from there.
In upcoming episodes, we will keep you up to date on our progress on this project and others.